and welcome back to Office Optimism with me, Sharala. And I just want to first start by saying thank you to all of my new subscribers and for all of my returning viewers. I totally appreciate you being here with me on this joyful journey. So today we are going to turn our attention to conflict. Yes, that C word that seems to find itself creeping into every relationship that we have. Conflict is something that we are going to tackle today. We are first going to start with the toll of conflict and that it has on the workplace. Then we're going to move into the types of conflict management styles. And then we're going to end with some tips on how to resolve conflict. So first and foremost, let us talk about conflict itself. I think conflict in itself has a negative connotation. People hear the word conflict and the first thing they think is, eek. Oh my goodness. I know for me, it is a word that I try to avoid like the plague. But the problem is we cannot avoid and ignore uncomfortable conversations because when we do, we risk having very, very detrimental consequences. So first, let's dive into the research and let's see what it tells us about the toll that conflict has on the workplace. There was a survey that was published back in April 2024 by the Workplace Peace Institute. And they actually surveyed a large swath of professionals that dealt with from senior executives to middle managers down to line workers. And when they surveyed them, they really wanted to see what was the state of workplace conflict. And so the results to me were astonishing. 88% of the respondents stated that they had witnessed poor morale due to workplace conflict. 55% of respondents stated that they themselves had been victims of personal attacks in the workplace. And 48% of those respondents actually stated that they have been victims of workplace bullying. Now, this study also indicated what the triggers of workplace conflict are. And we know that every time we get together, we are here to tackle challenges as they may present in the workplace and in life, and try to figure out what are some tools that we can have and that we can develop to be able to learn how to deal with those challenges. So with conflict is triggered by lack of trust. Also, it's triggered by detrimental workplace communication, and it is also triggered by workload, which is mismanaged. One thing that we see is that sometimes individuals abuse their power in the workplace, and that goes hand in hand with that last statistic that we talked about, those individuals that feel as if they are being bullied in the workplace. And when bullying enters into a workspace or even into a life space, it starts to have emotional and physical effects. This same survey indicated that individuals have an emotional and a physical effect when it deals with stress related to workplace conflict. 53% of the respondents stated that they experienced stress due to workplace conflict. 45% of the respondents stated that they became physically ill or even took off from work because of conflict. And 77% of the individuals reported being disengaged because of conflict. Now we know about disengagement, and disengagement leads to lower productivity and, of course, that cycle of lower morale. And so I like to really look at this research because it tells us that conflict is something that we have to address. We cannot ignore. When we ignore conflict, it just becomes an unhealthy factor inside of our workspaces and even our life spaces. And so the way that people handle conflict, they handled it quite differently. And so the next topic that we're going to talk about is conflict management styles. Now, how many of you out there have heard of Thomas and Kilmann? Thomas and Kilmann were both professors, and back in the 1970s, they came up with the Thomas-Kilmann inventory, better known as the TKI. I know that I've taken the TKI before. You may have taken it before. And if you have not, and if you're a leader or you're a part of a team, I encourage you to look into the TKI and see how you may be able to take it yourself for professional development, but also as a team building activity so that you can learn where your default conflict management style may be and also where others' default may be. So as I go through the conflict management styles, I want to emphasize that not one of the styles is better than another style. What you may find is that each of the styles might be of importance to use in certain situations. But what's most important is that you know what your default is, and also you can recognize what someone else's may be, so that you may be able to adjust so that y'all can find a common ground and start resolving conflict. So there are 5 different styles when we're talking about conflict management with the Thomas-Kilmann inventory. First thing for you to understand is that there is like an X horizontal axis and there is a Y axis that goes vertical. And when we think about the X axis, we're thinking about the cooperativeness that we have with other individuals. And when we think about the Y axis, we are thinking about our assertiveness. Okay, so if we think about those just like this, the X axis and the Y axis, we're going to start at the top. The top left-hand box is competing. That's a competing conflict management style. Individuals that default to this, they are kind of in the mindset of high assertiveness and low cooperativeness, which means it's my way or the highway. Yes, they get what they want and they don't too much care about the next person. And so that is what we know as competing. The next box that we're going to look at is going to be on the top right. And that one is collaborating. I will tell you, collaborating is the one that I really strive to be in. That is what we know as the win-win. It is high in assertiveness and it is high in cooperativeness. When we are in it together and we are trying to figure out how can I win and how can you win, that in itself will promote a better environment for us to be able to resolve conflict. Now we're going to move to the lower left quadrant. And in that one is low in assertiveness and also low in cooperativeness. And this one I'd like for you to think of as, I'm closing my eyes, okay? This is avoiding. Now, I have to tell you, this is my default, unfortunately. As I told you earlier, when I hear conflict, I just want to run. I do not want to have to deal with it. But one thing I know that in the workplace, you cannot do that. You cannot hide. When you're in a leadership position, you definitely can't. But it's okay to recognize that avoiding is the default. With this one, it's kind of like, not right now, we'll deal with that later. But you can see how that could be a problem, because when we don't deal with challenges head on, they just start to grow. They start to grow legs and they turn into this ugly monster. So by the time that we do tackle them, it just becomes very overwhelming. So that's avoiding, right? So now we are going to move to the lower right quadrant, and that one is accommodating. It is low on assertiveness, but high on cooperativeness. And what that means is basically it's have it your way. that person that resides in this quadrant where that's their default, they usually just concede to the next person most of the time. And that in itself, it may be okay in some instances, but if that is the case all the time, that individual never gets what it is that they need at any moment in time. So let us move to the last conflict management style, and that's the one right in the middle, and that is called compromising. With compromising, that is a give and take. That is split it in half. Some people get some of what they want and others get what they want. And so those are the 5 conflict management styles according to Thomas and Kilman. And so again, it is important for us just to understand what those are, try to identify and figure out which one you seem to default into, and then recognize what the other ones are. Because if you find yourself in a situation where you are trying to resolve a conflict with another individual and potentially they're presenting a different type of conflict resolution style, you will know how to adjust accordingly and somehow try to figure out how to get to a win-win solution for everyone. So now we are going to move along into the tips for conflict resolution. So, tips to resolve conflict. The first one is cultivate a positive environment. Now, this is something that we have been doing throughout each of our episodes. It's important for us to always remain positive. But when we are dealing with conflict, how positivity erupts in this situation is you are genuinely being interested in what the next person is saying. You're taking cues from what they're saying. You are doing head nods. You're basically letting them know that you are there to be engaged in the conversation. Now, some people do say to interject humor, but I will caution you on that. If you are not a funny person, this is not the time for funny business. However, if you somehow have it within you to be able to interject some humor into the situation, it could help cut the tension and to ease the conversation flow. The next tip that we have is to employ empathetic communication. First and foremost with communication is we have to turn our listening ears on. We need to be actively listening to the next person. A lot of times, especially in a conflict, we are listening to respond and not listening to understand. So that's the very first thing that we need to do. But sometimes in order to do that, you have to tell yourself that you are not there to argue. You are there to seek to understand what it is that the next person has to deal with. So try to learn from their perspective. Try to see it from their perspective. Try to, when they are talking to you, understand what it is that they are saying. And if there is something that they're saying that you don't quite understand, stop and ask a question for clarity. It's very important that this tip is not skipped. Whenever we are doing anything in life, communication is key. And you have to be able to communicate clearly yourself. So when you respond to the individual, make sure that you are using I statements, that you are letting them know how whatever is going on in this conflict, how it's affecting you, so that they understand your perspective too. Okay, the third tip is shift your perspective. It is important that when you come into resolving conflicts, that you don't think of it as a challenge that you're approaching, but as an opportunity that you have. This is an opportunity to build relationships. Whenever we resolve conflicts, relationships are strengthened. And the last tip number 4, is collaborate for a win-win. This is where we try to seek common ground. No matter who it is or in what situation you're dealing with, whenever conflict is presented, in order for us to find a sustainable resolution, it's important that we find a common ground for a win to be achieved for everyone involved. Okay, we have gotten to the point where It is our joyful point. And the joyful point of this episode for conflict resolution is this: be creative. Whenever you're thinking about when and how we are going to enter into this conversation to resolve this challenge, think about where's a neutral ground that you could go to. A lot of times with conflict, whether it's workplace conflict or home conflict, many of the times the conflict evolves around the workspace that you're in or the place where you work around or live around. It seems to trigger those emotions. So think, is there a neutral place that you could go? Somewhere that may be an open space or possibly a place that might jog for creativity or new innovative perspectives. The next thing that we should do in this joyful point is potentially like a creative way to approach the conflict resolution. Sometimes individuals do a role play. When you insert role play, that allows individuals to kind of break character and let people see how others experience them. Now, when you do this, it is important that you still understand the seriousness of the topic at hand. But this is our joyful point. This is a way for us to kind of insert creativity when trying to resolve conflict. Now is time for the Office Optimism focal point. The focal point of today is one of my favorite sayings: what you allow, you promote. Now let that sink in. Think about that with conflict. Imagine you are like me and you avoid conflict. If we live by what we allow, we promote, by not addressing conflict, we are promoting that bad behavior to just stay there and to be there and to irritate. So with this, we learn that we have to address conflict head on. We need to, no matter how much it scares us, no matter how much discomfort it brings. And so with positivity, we can address every challenge that comes into our life, even if our voice shakes. All right, y'all, we got this. So I needed this lesson as much as the next person. This was an opportunity for me to dive into a topic that I teach on a lot, but many times it's easier for me to talk about it than for me to actually implement it. And so every time I have an opportunity to dive into this topic, it gives me an opportunity to grow more confident in my ability to address conflict head on. What I do know is that every time that we go into uncomfortable situations, or when we recognize that that is the right decision to do for either accountability purposes or even just trying to build relationships in your life, what I find is that it brings great joy in the end because everybody is open, honest, and now can move forward with a great sustainable plan to ensure that we can have stronger relationships moving forward. Okay, so another episode has come to a close. I hope that you found at least one thing in this episode that allows you to choose joy every single day. So if you like this content, please like, subscribe, and share. Once I get to 50 likes and 50 subscribers, there will be a giveaway. So I thank you all for your support in my journey towards reaching my goals. That's it. I thank you for staying with me. Stay positive, be bright, and keep shining. Bye-bye.